Hey guys, welcome back to my watch vlog, and thanks again for watching my videos and all your support. Greatly appreciated. A couple more questions we'll address on this vlog, and as is the case with the previous ones, if you could please do me the favor of leaving questions, comments, and concerns below so I can address them and have topics for future blogs. I really enjoy doing these, and I really enjoy the fact that people seem to appreciate and get things out of these, so let's keep it going. So again, any questions related to watches or any questions in general, frankly, feel free. Leave them in the comment section below, and greatly appreciated. So we have two topics for today. One deals with the flood of non-official parts on the watch market, Chinese parts in particular, and this relates to not original OEM parts being used to replace and repair watches. And these are real watches that are having Chinese and other copycat parts put into them. So that's going to be one of the topics. And the other topic is other brands such as like Blancpain, for example, where they don't quite get the same recognition as some of the big tier brands like Rolex, Breitling, and Omega. So what's the deal with them, and are they something worth investigating? So let's get started. The first part is let's get into these copycat parts. And this is an issue that I personally think really needs to get addressed. So as some of you may or may not be aware, in the watch world in the last several years, a couple of really big things happened. One is that the Swatch Group really got restrictive on who can get access to their ETA movements. And this has put the availability of parts for ETA movements in a much lower availability. And thus that they're much harder to get a hold of, and they've stopped sourcing movements out to other companies. So getting service and getting parts for these Swatch movements is going to get that much more difficult. And another big thing that happened, which a lot of people aren't talking about, and something that I personally was kind of upset with, is Rolex has gotten very restrictive on their parts as well. So Rolex wasn't in the habit of selling their movements to other manufacturers. However, they used to be in a situation where they would make spare parts available to jewelers. So you could be, any mom and pop jewelry shop or official Rolex dealer, and you could, there were ways of getting a hold of official Rolex parts. So if your watch went down, you of course could send it into Rolex, and Rolex would replace it or repair it for you. However, a lot of people didn't want to go through that expense and having to have their watch sent away to the Rolex USA or the Rolex Switzerland watch shop to be repaired, and they would just prefer to take their watches into a local jeweler to have repairs done there. And for years and years and years and years, this has been a totally acceptable way to go. And one of the watches that I had, for example, my Rolex Daytona, I had a bunch of issues with it, which you can see on my Swiss Watch Issues vlog. But long story short, because it was under warranty from a watch trader that I had purchased it from, and this is a watch trader that deals in authentic watches, very good reputation in the community, and they sell high-end watches like Patek Philippe and everything else. So again, a very upstanding watchmaker. I took it to them, and they were going to work on it. And before a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have had any concern about them working on my watch. But the problem is when you have companies, like Rolex and Swatch and a couple others that are now getting very restrictive on letting people, purchase parts from them. The problem is these mom and pop shops are having that much harder of a time getting a hold of official Rolex parts. And so if they're upstanding ones, they might be able to find parts from watches that have maybe been damaged and use official parts through, sourcing them from, again, damaged watches, or they might have other means of getting hold of authentic parts. But some of the less reputable, more shady dealers, what they're doing is they're buying, non-official parts. And, I'll give you just an example. One of the pushers on my Daytona, I didn't talk about this on my vlog, but one of the pushers on the Daytona actually was having issues. And the jeweler replaced the pusher, and when I got the watch back, I looked at the pusher and I'm like, well, this doesn't look right. It had a ring around it, and it shouldn't have had a ring around it. And long story short, my curiosity got the best of me, and I went on eBay and just looked up pushers for Rolex Daytona. And sure enough, because there's a million homage watches of these things, you can buy Chinese-made parts that fit the Rolex Daytona, and sure enough, a lot of the Chinese parts I saw had this ring around it. So I got in an argument with this jeweler and said, I don't think this is an official Rolex part you put on my watch, and I want it fixed. And he was able to get an official Rolex part that I verified, and we had this whole issue. But, because I had that experience, that put me in a very negative mindset in terms of, every time I'm going to go send my watch into service, if I don't, pay the $1,200, whatever Rolex was going to charge me to service it, if I send it to a jeweler, even a reputable jeweler, there's a chance I could end up putting Chinese parts in my watch or, some other knockoff parts. And, the good and bad thing of this is a lot of these parts, unlike this pusher that I mentioned had this special ring around it that wasn't normal, a lot of these parts are indiscernible from the real thing. And it takes, even the most skilled jewelers, unless they really, really know their stuff on some of these pieces, they're not going to be able to tell the difference between an authentic part and an aftermarket part. And, there's some of you guys out there that will say, well, if that's the case, then what does it really matter? Well, I think it really matters because, again, you're spending this kind of money and you're paying for service, you should be getting authentic parts. And, in theory, Rolex's parts are going to be superior to any copycat parts on the market. And if you ever go to sell your watch down the road, if anybody discovers, that there's not official Rolex parts in it, it's going to kill the value of the watch. And it may actually, question whether or not the watch is authentic because they're noticing these parts on it. So you get into these, kind of like Frankenstein watches where traditionally it's like a made-up watch where people have taken a bunch of authentic parts and kind of scrambled them together into, something that never was. But now you've got these Frankenstein watches in the sense of you could have a real, say Rolex watch, and now people have replaced some of the original parts in it with Chinese parts. So something to keep track of. All right, as for the second part of the questions I received, this is in regards to, again, watch companies such as Blancpain that are highly respected by watch enthusiasts. And they may even have some key models like Blancpain has the 50 Fathoms dive watch, which I know the viewer that asked this question brought up, and personally that's one of my favorite watches of all time. I think it's spectacularly pretty. And for those of you that can't afford one but like the style, if there's a chance for you to do a little Google searching, you'll see there's a Seiko one that's about $150 that looks very similar. So there's your tip for the day. But the question was, what do I think about those and why is the resale so poor? And, unfortunately, this just kind of goes down to brand awareness and supply and demand. So, people that don't know anything about watches and people that know a lot about watches both can get mutually excited about big companies like Omega and Breitling and Rolex and Tag Heuer. But, the other, I guess let me add to that question. There's a couple other big brands too, like Audemars, Piguet, Patek Philippe, and, Alongzona and Vacheron and Constantin, which again have a lot of respect from the watch community. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other brands out there that make great quality watches. Even Jaeger-LeCoultre is kind of in the same kind of category. I'd say Piguet is in this category. Piaget, there's a couple other great watch companies that make these incredibly high quality watches. They may even have a couple really great models out there that people have heard of. Glashütte original even, I'd put in this as well. The problem is that there's nowhere near the demand for those types of pieces as there are for the big brands. There's a much higher demand for a Rolex Submariner than there would ever be for a Blancpain 50 Fathoms. And part of that is I understand first that they're very different price points. A Blancpain 50 Fathoms is substantially more expensive typically. But the reality is there's some of the name recognition too. So unfortunately or fortunately, this is kind of the way the world works is there's a lot more brand recognition for Rolex than there is for Blancpain. And not everybody that buys a Rolex is concerned with brand recognition, but there are a lot of people that buy a Rolex just because everybody knows what a Rolex is and they want that status that comes with it. And unfortunately, if you have a little bit of a status-minded orientation to you, buying a Blancpain isn't really something that's going to give you any status or recognition. So, I would say in some elitist circles, there are definitely some wealthy people that aren't even really into watches, but they know what a Patek Philippe is. And why do they know what a Patek Philippe is besides their great history? Probably because they're well aware that they're extremely expensive and you have to have a lot of money to own one. So it's kind of a right to say, oh, I can afford a Patek Philippe. And unfortunately, because society is this way, and this is my opinion, and feel free to tell me you feel otherwise, again, because there are people that are minded with, having people appreciate the name on the watch as much as the manufacturing and the quality that goes into it, you kind of see this thing where certain watches hold their value pretty well and certain watches don't. And the thing that I think you need to have a watch that holds value well is you kind of need both elements. You need the name that's respected in terms of making great quality watches, but you also need the name in terms of getting kind of a brand recognition by people that may not be so into watches. So again, like with a Rolex or a Patek or even an Omega or these bigger brands, you not only have people that are watch enthusiasts that really appreciate them for their quality and their style, but you have people that aren't really into watches that, they don't really care, but they like the name, and the name gives them that instant status too. And so when you have watches that don't give you both of those elements, you could have watches, again, like Jaeger-LeCoultre or, Glashut or Blancpain, where they make great quality watches, but you're not getting that status recognition because, again, you have to be kind of in the know and a real watch person to know about them. You're not going to get that resale value on those watches. Look at a company like even Audemars Piguet. The Royal Oak line from Audemars Piguet, those watches hold their value really well. The rest of the Audemars Piguet, not really. Why is that? Because a lot of rappers wear them in their rap videos and put diamonds all over them, so they kind of have that recognition. Or if you take a Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso, in the watch community, a lot of people know what the Reverso is, but if I walked up to 10 people on the street, I'm guessing maybe on a good day, one person would have ever heard of Jaeger-LeCoultre, let alone would know what the Reverso is. And the same goes with the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. And some watches just kind of were popular for a while and went out, like Franck Muller was really popular for a while. And then they had issues with, it kind of came out where they were sourcing some of the movements, and it kind of tarnished their reputation a little bit. And then on the flip side, you get watches that have status in the name, but they don't really have the manufacturing behind them to get watch enthusiasts excited about them. Like Cartier, for example. Cartier is a jeweler, and they make the name on a Cartier watch is going to get you instant status. But if you're a watch connoisseur, odds are you're not going to get too excited about a Cartier watch because, again, they're a jeweler. They're not a famous watch manufacturer. They're not known for their great horological inventions and history. Cartier is doing some in-house movements now, and we'll see where that goes. But again, you buy a Cartier more for status than because they have this great horological history. And again, I understand that that's changing at this point. So that's kind of my take. Fortunately, there's a lot of brands out there that they're missing both of those elements. They either have great horological tradition and they get watch enthusiasts excited, but they have no instant status, so then there's not enough demand for that. Or they have the status and people kind of buy them with status, but they don't know anything about watches, and then secondhand, nobody really wants them. And because anything that's status, after a while, there's trends, and they go in and they go out, and it's after a couple of years, they're no longer cool to have. And watch enthusiasts like us don't want them because they don't have any real history to them or any great engineering in them, so they kind of get dumped. So that's kind of my take, and I think it's quite unfortunate. Some watches, I understand why they don't have any value, like, again, Mont Blanc. Mont Blanc is famous for pens. Why would you buy a Mont Blanc watch? But, in the question, again, watches like Blancpain, or, I'd add throw other ones in there again, like Breguet or Jaeger-LeCoultre, or even Zenith. Zenith has some wonderful watches, Piaget, Girard-Perregaux. There's a whole bunch. I think you kind of need both of those elements. So it's good news for people like us that are watch enthusiasts. If you like one of these brands, it's famous for their horological traditions and for great quality, and they have terrible resale, then hopefully somebody buys the exact model that you want, and then you can get a great deal on it used, right? That's kind of the perfect dream. So that works out for us. So don't buy a Blancpain 50 Fathoms new, but pick one up on the used market for $5,000 to $10,000 and be happy with your purchase. So I guess that's kind of how I'd respond to that. Anyway, thank you all for all your support. Please leave me your questions below for the next vlog post, and have a good afternoon. Thanks.